The first thing people remembered was the silence. It fell over the wooden church like dust after a gunshot, thick and choking, when the groom did not come. Sunlight pressed through the tall windows, lighting the white cloth on the altar and the wildflowers tied to the benches. But nothing could warm the cold space where a man should have been standing. Outside, horses shifted and snorted, and somewhere far off a train whistle cried across the plains, careless of broken promises. Inside, a young woman stood alone in her wedding dress, her hands clenched, her eyes fixed on the empty doorway, as if staring hard enough might force fate to change its mind. This was the Old West, where towns were built on stubborn hope and held together by rumor, pride, and fear. In a place like this, a wedding was more than love. It was a promise to the land and to the people who watched. When a man failed to show, it was not only a personal shame, but a public wound. Whispers began before the church doors even closed. Some said the groom had run. Others said he had never planned to stay. A few muttered that courage was a rare thing in men who spoke sweet words, but feared hard lives. No one dared speak too loudly, while the woman still stood there, her face pale but proud, refusing to cry where all could see. She had grown up knowing how quickly joy could turn. The frontier taught lessons early. Storms came without warning. Crops failed. Men left. Still, she had believed this day would be different. She had believed in the promise made to her, under an open sky, with hands held tight and voices low. Now the promise lay broken at her feet like a dropped glass, sharp and useless. The preacher cleared his throat, unsure of what to do with a ceremony that had lost its meaning. The guests shifted, embarrassed witnesses, to a moment that would be talked about for years. What no one inside the church knew was that eyes were already on the town. From the ridge beyond the cottonwoods, riders watched the small cluster of buildings. Among them sat an Apache chief, straight-backed and still, his gaze steady as stone. He had come for a reason that had nothing to do with church bells or white dresses, yet everything to do with honor. He had learned long ago that promises spoken lightly by some men could cause deep harm to others. On the frontier, such harm rarely stayed contained, spread like fire in dry grass. The chief had seen the woman before, not often, but enough to know her strength. She carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind that did not beg for attention. When she spoke, people listened. When she worked hard. In a world that often dismissed women as background, she stood like a post driven deep into the ground. The chief respected that. Respect to him was not given freely, but once earned, it was defended. Word had reached the nearby camps that a man from the town had boasted of winning her heart, of standing tall before the preacher, then riding away before sunrise. He had laughed about it, calling it freedom, calling it a clever escape. To the Apache chief, such talk was poison. Among his people, a promise was a living thing. You fed it with truth, or you killed it with lies. A man who fled from his word was not clever. He was hollow. Inside the church, the woman finally lowered her eyes. She took a breath that shook her shoulders but did not break her spine. Slowly, she turned to face the crowd. There was no speech, no plea for sympathy. She simply gathered her skirt and walked down the aisle alone. Each step echoed like a hammer on wood. Some looked away, ashamed. Others watched with a mix of pity and cruel interest. Outside, the sky seemed too wide, the day too bright for what had just happened. She did not run. She did not collapse. She walked past the hitching posts, past the faces she had known all her life, until she reached the edge of town. There she stopped, staring out at the open land, as if weighing whether it was kinder than the people behind her. The wind tugged at her veil, and she pulled it free, letting it fall to the dirt. That simple act felt like the end of one life and the uncertain start of another. It was then that the riders appeared. Hooves beat a slow rhythm, controlled and deliberate. Townsfolk turned, hands drifting toward belts, nerves rising. Encounters with Apache warriors were often wrapped in fear and old stories, most of them wrong and all of them dangerous. At their front road, the chief raised one hand, a gesture of peace, and the riders stopped. His eyes went not to the men with guns, but to the woman standing alone. For a moment, no one spoke. The air tightened. Then the chief dismounted and walked forward, his steps measured. He stopped a respectful distance from her and inclined his head. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear, caring without effort. He did not ask about the wedding. He did not offer pity. He spoke of promises, of how the land remembers those who keep their word and those who do not. He spoke of courage and how it often shows itself after shame. The woman listened, surprised not by his presence, but by his understanding. She felt seen in a way that startled her. When he finished, he said something that rippled through the crowd like a sudden wind. He said that a man who abandons a woman at the altar abandons his own honor. He said such a man should be confronted not with fists first, but with truth. And then, looking directly at her, he said words no one expected to hear. He said, "I will stand beside you. I will be your boyfriend, not in the way of childish promises, but in the way of protection and respect. I will face the one who wronged you, and he will answer for his cowardice." Gasps followed. Murmurs rose. Some laughed nervously, unsure if this was a joke. Others bristled at the challenge implied. The woman felt her heart pound, not with sudden love, but with something steadier. Possibility. She did not answer right away. She studied the chief's face, searching for mockery and finding none. Only resolve. Far from the town, the man who had run believed himself safe. He drank in a back room, boasting to strangers, unaware that the story he treated as entertainment had already grown teeth. He did not know that honor, once stirred, could travel fast across open land. He did not know that by nightfall, his name would be spoken by a man who did not forget insults, especially those delivered to the defenseless. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky with copper and red, the chief mounted his horse again. He told the woman that the next step was hers to choose. She could remain, rebuild, or walk a different path. Whatever she chose, she would not walk it alone tonight. She felt the weight of every eye on her, the pull of fear and hope twisting together inside her chest. She took one step toward him, then stopped. Somewhere between the fading light and the long shadows, a decision waited to be made. The town held its breath, unaware that this moment would change more than one life, and that the confrontation yet to come would test not only a coward's nerve, but the meaning of courage itself. She did not speak right away. The ground beneath her boots felt uneven, as if the earth itself was waiting to see which way she would lean. The chief watched her without hurry, giving her the space most men never did. Around them, the town held still. Even the winds seemed to soften, brushing past like a careful listener. At last, she nodded once, not as an answer of the heart, but as an agreement of courage. I think it was enough for now. They walked together toward the edge of town, not touching, yet close enough that people noticed. Some faces showed fear, others curiosity, and a few held a quiet respect they had never shown her before. She felt strange under their eyes. All her life she had been known as steady, proper, and predictable. Now, standing beside an Apache chief, she had stepped outside the lines drawn for her since childhood. The feeling was frightening, but also alive. As they moved, memories rose uninvited. She remembered arriving in this town as a girl, her dress dusty from travel, her future packed into a single wagon. She remembered learning how to smile when spoken over, how to swallow hurt to keep peace. The man who left her at the altar had been part of that pattern. He was charming in public, distant in private, always promising tomorrow would be better. She had wanted to believe him because belief felt easier than doubt. The chief noticed the way her shoulders tightened as they passed the saloon. That building had swallowed many men whole, including the one who ran. Inside, laughter often covered fear, and whiskey gave courage only until morning. The chief had seen places like this before, where men measured themselves by lies they told each other. He did not judge the town aloud, but he understood it. He had traded with towns like this, fought near them, watched them rise and fall with the railroads and the seasons. They stopped near a small stable where the riders had gathered. The horses stood calm, used to long waits and longer journeys. One of the warriors offered her water without a word. She accepted, surprised again by the simple courtesy. As she drank, she felt the dryness in her throat ease, though the tightness in her chest remained. She wondered what the chief truly wanted. Protection was a heavy word. Confrontation carried danger. Nothing about this path felt safe. The chief spoke quietly, not to command, but to explain. He told her that he had once trusted a promise from a man who feared his own shadow. That promise had cost lives. Since then, the chief believed that unchallenged cowardice only grew stronger. He was not seeking revenge, he said, but balance. When a man broke his word publicly, the harm echoed. Someone had to stand in that echo and refuse to let it fade into laughter and forgetting. She listened, understanding more than she expected. Her own pain felt less lonely hearing it set beside another. Still, she wondered what confronting the groom would truly bring. Would it restore her dignity or deepen the wound? Would it free her or bind her to this moment forever? The chief did not answer those questions for her. He only said that running from truth made it sharper when it finally caught up. As evening deepened, lanterns flickered to life in town. People began to gather in small groups, whispering. News traveled fast in places with little else to do. By nightfall, everyone knew the Apache chief had taken an interest in the abandoned bride. Some feared violence, others hoped for a spectacle. Few considered the quieter possibility of justice without blood. The preacher paced near the church, torn between relief that the ceremony was over and dread of what might follow. Far away, the man who fled felt a prickle he could not explain. He laughed louder than before, slapped the bar, ordered another drink. He told himself that towns forgot quickly, that shame faded if ignored. Yet each time the door opened, his shoulders stiffened. He did not know why the image of her standing alone returned again and again, refusing to loosen its grip. He pushed it down with another swallow, choosing noise over thought. Back near the stable, the woman asked where they would go next. The chief said they would wait. Night revealed truths that daylight often hid. Those who ran in the sun stumbled in the dark. He told her she could return home if she wished, that his offer was not a chain. She surprised herself by shaking her head. Home felt smaller now, filled with pity she did not want. Wherever this led, she wanted to face it awake. They sat near a low fire, the flames throwing soft light on weathered faces. One of the warriors hummed an old tune, barely louder than the crackle of wood. It reminded her of lullabies from childhood, songs meant to steady fear rather than chase it away. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stared into the fire, watching sparks rise and vanish. She thought about the word boyfriend, how strange it sounded spoken with such seriousness. It was not romance he offered, but a stance, line drawn in the dirt. The chief studied the stars as they emerged. He believed the night sky carried memory, that it watched over promises longer than people could. He wondered how the town would respond when the confrontation came. Fear made men unpredictable. Pride made them dangerous. He had chosen this moment carefully, but choice never guaranteed outcome. Still, he trusted the path he walked because it was built on respect rather than rage. The woman felt herself changing in small ways she could not yet name. Sitting among strangers who treated her as whole rather than broken, she sensed strength returning to places she thought had gone numb. She did not suddenly forgive the man who left her. Forgiveness felt distant and unclear. What she felt instead was clarity. She had been wronged, and wrongs deserved to be named. A rider returned quietly from the edge of town, sharing news in a low voice. The groom was still drinking, still boasting, still blind to the shift happening around him. Chief nodded, unsurprised. He told the rider to watch and wait. Nothing would be done in haste. The woman caught the exchange and felt a chill. The pieces were moving now, even if the final shape remained hidden. As the fire burned lower, she asked the chief why he had chosen those words, why he had said he would be her boyfriend instead of something grander or safer. He considered before answering. He said that words should fit the people who hear them. In this town, boyfriend meant someone who stood up, who showed his face, who did not disappear when whispers started. It was a challenge spoken in plain language, one the coward would understand. She smiled faintly at that, the first real smile since morning. It did not erase the pain, but it cut through the fog around it. She realized that whatever happened next, the story would no longer be told without her voice in it. That mattered more than she had known. The night grew deeper, and with it the sense that dawn would bring consequences. Somewhere between the firelight and the dark edge of town, a man who ran from his wedding slept uneasily, unaware of the footsteps already moving toward him. And beside the woman he had abandoned, another man waited, steady and unafraid, ready to confront a coward in a town that had long mistaken silence for peace. Dawn did not arrive gently. It crept in low and gray, dragging a chill behind it that settled into bones and thoughts alike. The woman woke before the town stirred, sitting up by the dying embers of the fire. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory returned like a weight on her chest. The empty church, the watching eyes, the chief's calm voice cutting through the noise. Ash! She rose quietly, brushing ash from her skirt, and stepped a short distance away to breathe. From the edge of camp she watched the town as it slowly came back to life. Smoke lifted from chimneys, a door creaked open. Somewhere a baby cried. Life went on, careless of broken vows. That thought used to anger her. Now it only sharpened her focus. She wondered how many people would pretend nothing had happened once the day fully began. How many would choose comfort over truth? The chief joined her without sound. He did not speak at first. He followed her gaze, reading the town like a map etched with old mistakes. He told her that conflict rarely arrived with shouting. Most often it came wrapped in routine. Men would act as if nothing had changed, hoping the problem would tire and leave. He said the hardest part was refusing to play along. In the town, the groom woke with a headache and a sour taste in his mouth. He cursed the light spilling through the window and rolled over, knocking over an empty bottle. As he dressed, he caught sight of himself in a cracked mirror. For a brief moment, he did not like what he saw. He pushed the feeling aside, straightened his collar, and told himself again that leaving had been the smart choice. Marriage meant responsibility. Responsibility meant being seen for who he was. He preferred the freedom of half-truths. At the general store, talk buzzed low and sharp. Some blamed the woman, saying she must have driven him away. Others blamed the groom, though they softened their words, careful not to anger the wrong man. A few spoke of the Apache chief with unease, worried his presence would bring trouble. The storekeeper listened more than he spoke, noting who chose which side. On the frontier, memory mattered. People remembered who stood where when things turned. The woman walked into town beside the chief, heads turning as if pulled by a string. She felt exposed, but did not slow her pace. Each step felt like a claim. She noticed details she had never seen before, the way people avoided her eyes or studied her with new interest. She wondered how long it would take for the story to twist into something unrecognizable. That fear tightened her jaw, but she kept walking. A group of men near the saloon stiffened when they saw the chief. One spat into the dirt, another laughed too loudly. None approached. They had grown used to dominance through numbers and noise, neither of which worked well against quiet resolve. The chief stopped near the hitching post and waited, his posture open but unyielding. The woman stood beside him, hands folded, her presence a reminder of why he had come. Inside the saloon, the groom felt the shift before he saw it. Conversation dulled, then dropped. He followed the line of stairs to the window and felt his stomach turn. For a heartbeat, he considered slipping out the back. Pride stopped him. Fear pushed harder. He finished his drink and stepped outside, forcing a grin onto his face as if greeting an old friend. He spoke first, making a joke about misunderstandings and wild stories. His voice carried, but it lacked its usual ease. The woman heard him and felt a familiar anger rise, sharp and hot. Before she could speak, the chief did. He asked a simple question, clear enough that no one could pretend not to hear. He asked why a man would swear himself before witnesses and then vanish. The groom laughed again, waving a hand. He said things happened, that hearts changed. He said no harm was meant. The words hung thin and empty in the morning air. The chief did not raise his voice. He said harm was not measured by intention alone. He said abandoning someone publicly was an act that demanded accountability. The crowd shifted, sensing the ground move beneath old habits. A woman from the town watched from across the street, her face tight with concern. She had once believed the groom's promises herself years before, and had learned too late how easily he walked away. She felt something stir watching him falter now. Nearby, a young boy stared wide-eyed, absorbing a lesson no schoolhouse taught. Conflict was not always fists and blood. Sometimes it was standing still and refusing to lie. The groom bristled, anger rising to cover fear. He accused the chief of interference, of stirring trouble where none belonged. The chief answered that honor crossed boundaries, that cowardice did too, said the land itself held memory, and men ignored it at their peril. The words unsettled some listeners more than threats would have. Superstition and belief tangled tightly in places like this. The woman spoke then, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She said she did not want apologies whispered behind closed doors. She wanted the truth spoken where the lie had lived. She did not ask for love, only acknowledgement. Her words cut deeper than shouting could. The groom looked at her, really looked, and for the first time seemed unsure. From the edge of town, the preacher watched, torn between duty and fear. He believed in forgiveness, but he also believed in truth, wondered if peace built on silence was peace at all. Nearby, a railroad worker leaned on his hammer, thinking of his own promises back east, and whether he had kept them or buried them under distance. The confrontation did not end. It shifted, thickened. The groom backed away, muttering about not owing explanations. The chief did not pursue. He said that running again would only deepen the question hanging over the town. He said time would not erase it. Then he turned away, signaling that this moment was not finished, only paused. As they walked back toward the stable, the woman felt a mix of relief and frustration. Part of her wanted everything decided now. Another part understood that slow pressure often broke stone more surely than force. The chief told her that unresolved conflict had power. It drew truth to the surface whether men liked it or not. Behind them, the groom stood alone, the laughter gone. He felt the eyes of the town differently now, not admiring but measuring. He realized that escape might no longer be simple. The story had grown larger than him, and he had lost control of its telling. The sun climbed higher, casting hard light on the street. Nothing had been settled. No apologies made. No justice declared. Yet something essential had changed. Lines had been drawn, not with weapons, but with words and witness. The woman felt it in her chest, a tight coil of anticipation and fear. She knew the hardest part was still ahead, and that when the next move came, it would demand more than courage. The day stretched long, heavy with things unsaid. The woman returned to the small room she rented near the edge of town, feeling the weight of every look that followed her. Some eyes carried sympathy now, others judgment, and a few something like respect. She closed the door and leaned against it, pressing a hand to her chest until her breathing slowed. She knew this was no longer only her story. It had become a mirror, forcing the town to see itself. Across the yard, the Apache chief spoke quietly with his riders. He sensed movement beneath the surface, like a river swelling before it broke its banks. The groom's pride had been wounded in public, and wounded pride was dangerous. The chief ordered no action, only watchfulness. He believed the next choice would come from the man who ran, not from force. The hardest confrontations were the ones people chose to walk into on their own. Inside the saloon, the groom sat apart from the others. The laughter he usually drew had thinned. Men spoke around him, not to him. He drank less, listening more, catching fragments of conversation that circled back to honor and courage. Each word felt like a finger pointing at his back. He thought about leaving town altogether. The road was open, and he had run before. But something held him in place. Perhaps it was the chief's steady gaze, or the woman's calm voice refusing to fade into shame. As evening approached, clouds gathered, heavy and dark. The air thickened, pressing down on the town. Storms on the plains had a way of arriving fast, stripping away pretense. The woman stepped outside, watching the sky change color. She thought about her parents, buried far from here, and what advice they might have given. She thought about the word boyfriend again, and how strange comfort had come from it. Not love, not yet, but solidarity. A knock came at her door. She opened it. She found the preacher standing there, hat in hand. He spoke carefully, saying the town was uneasy. The people were divided. He admitted he had not known what to do when the groom failed to appear, and that his silence had weighed on him. He said he wanted to stand where truth stood, even if it cost him favor. His words surprised her. She thanked him, realizing that change often started with small, trembling steps. Night fell with a low rumble of thunder. Lanterns were lit again, shadows stretching long across the street. The chief decided it was time to speak with the groom once more, not in the open street, but where the man could not hide behind an audience. He asked the woman if she wished to come. She hesitated only a moment before agreeing. Fear still lived in her, but it no longer ruled her. They walked toward the saloon as the first drops of rain fell, darkening the dust. Inside, the noise softened when they entered. The groom looked up, surprise flashing across his face, followed by something like resignation. The chief asked him to step outside. After a pause that felt endless, the groom did. Rain fell harder now, drumming on the wooden awnings. The street was nearly empty, most people watching from windows or doorways. The chief spoke plainly. He said the man still had a choice. He could face what he had done, speak truth without excuses, and allow the town to move forward. Or he could keep running, knowing that wherever he went, this shadow would follow. The groom clenched his fists, rain mixing with sweat on his brow. He accused the chief of cornering him, of making him the villain in a story that should have ended quietly. The chief answered that stories ended quietly only when lies were allowed to rest. The woman watched, her heart pounding, unsure what the next breath would bring. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp and loud. The groom flinched. In that moment, something in his face shifted. The mask slipped. He looked smaller, tired. He glanced at the woman, really seeing her again, not as a prize lost or a mistake made, but as a person he had wronged. His mouth opened, then closed. Words hovered, heavy and difficult. From a nearby doorway, townsfolk gathered closer, drawn by the storm and the tension. No one spoke. Rain washed the street clean, blurring footprints, as if offering a chance to start again. The preacher stood among them, hands clasped. The storekeeper leaned forward, eyes sharp. Even the young boy from earlier watched, wide-eyed, learning that moments like this shaped the world more than grand speeches ever could. The groom took a step forward, then stopped. His voice, when it came, was low. He said he had been afraid of being seen as ordinary, afraid of failing, afraid of the responsibility that came with standing still. The words did not excuse him, but they cracked the shell around his pride. The woman felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Hearing fear named changed its shape. The chief listened without interruption. When the groom finished, he said that fear was common, but cowardice was a choice. He said the path toward balance required more than confession. It required action. He did not say what that action must be, leaving the weight of decision where it belonged. Rain soaked through clothes, but no one moved. The woman felt the moment stretch, fragile and electric. She knew that whatever happened next would echo far beyond this street. She wondered what justice looked like here. An apology, public acknowledgement, or simply the courage to stop pretending. The groom looked around at the watching faces. The town he had thought would always bend around him. He saw that it would not. His shoulders sagged. He said he would speak in the church, where the promise had been broken. He said he would say what he had done, without laughter or blame. The words fell into the rain, tentative but real. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others remained cautious. The chief inclined his head, accepting the step without celebrating it. He turned to the woman, leaving the choice with her. She met his eyes and saw no pressure there, only support. The storm began to ease, rain thinning to a steady patter. The tension did not lift with it. Instead, it coiled tighter, drawn toward what was coming. The woman felt something steady settle in her chest. She did not know how the story would end, only that she would no longer be silent within it. As the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers following them into the night, the chief walked beside her back toward her room. The air smelled clean, washed of dust. Somewhere a door closed softly. Somewhere else a bell rang, marking the hour. They stopped at her door. Neither spoke for a moment. The chief said that dawn would bring clarity, one way or another. Said whatever the outcome, she had already reclaimed something important. She nodded, understanding that strength did not always look like victory. Sometimes it looked like standing through the storm and waiting for the ground to show itself. Inside, as she lay awake listening to the last drops fall, her thoughts raced ahead to the morning. The church. The words yet to be spoken. The possibility of a future not defined by abandonment. Outside, the chief kept watch, calm and patient, knowing the climax was close, and that when it came, it would change more than one heart. Morning came clear and bright, as if the storm had scrubbed the world clean. Sunlight fell through the church windows, touching the wooden benches and the simple altar, where flowers had once waited for a promise. The bell rang, not sharp this time, but steady, calling people not to celebration, but to witness. The town answered slowly. Men removed their hats. Women walked with careful steps. Children sensed the weight of the moment and stayed quiet. The woman arrived early, dressed plainly now, her wedding dress folded away like a chapter closed. She sat near the front, hands resting in her lap, breathing evenly. She felt fear, but it no longer controlled her. "You're all ready." Crossed the hardest line by showing up. The Apache chief stood near the doorway, not as a guard, but as a presence. He did not belong to the church, yet his respect for the moment was clear. Yes. He stood straight, eyes calm, ready to leave if asked, ready to stay if needed. The groom entered last. His face was pale, his movements stiff. He walked alone down the aisle he had abandoned, each step sounding louder than it should. The silence pressed in, but he did not turn away. When he reached the front, he faced the room, then turned toward the woman. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice rough but steady. He told the truth without decoration. He said he had promised more than he was willing to give. He said he ran because he feared being known for who he truly was, not for who he pretended to be. He admitted that leaving her at the altar was a selfish act, one that deserved the shame it brought. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said he understood if it never came. What mattered, he said, was that the lie was over. The words moved through the room like a slow wind. Some nodded, others frowned. The preacher stepped forward and spoke about accountability, about how confession did not erase harm, but opened the door to healing. He said the town, too, had lessons to learn about silence and comfort. He did not excuse the groom, but he did not condemn him either. He spoke of choosing better paths from this point forward. When the groom finished, he stepped back, his shoulders lighter, as if setting down a heavy pack. He looked once more at the woman, then bowed his head and walked out, leaving the church without applause or gears. Just space. The door closed behind him, and something in the room shifted. All eyes turned to the woman. She stood slowly, feeling the strength in her legs, the steadiness in her breath. She did not speak long. She said she accepted the truth because truth mattered. She said forgiveness was a road she would walk in her own time. What she wanted now was respect, and the freedom to choose her future without whispers following her like shadows. She thanked those who stood with her, including the chief, whose presence had reminded her that dignity did not depend on approval. The church let out its breath. People began to talk quietly, not with gossip, but reflection. Outside, the sky stretched wide and blue, the land unchanged, yet somehow new. The groom left town that afternoon. No one stopped him, no one chased him. His story would follow him, but it would no longer control this place. In the days that followed, life settled into a different rhythm. The woman returned to her work, but something had changed in how people treated her. Conversations paused when she approached, not out of discomfort, but attention. She was no longer seen as someone to pity, but someone who had stood firm when it would have been easier to disappear. The Apache chief stayed longer than planned, spoke with townsfolk, traded supplies, shared meals. Fear faded into familiarity. People saw that strength could be quiet, that respect could cross boundaries when given honestly. Children followed him at a distance, curious and unafraid. Elders listened when he spoke of balance and responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the woman and the chief walked along the edge of town. Land glowed gold, open and forgiving. She thanked him again, not for confronting the groom, but for standing beside her when she felt most alone. He said he had done only what honor required. He reminded her that she had done the hardest work herself. They spoke of the future, not in grand plans, but in possibilities. She said she wanted to build something steady, rooted in truth. He said he believed paths crossed for reasons, but stayed together by choice. The word boyfriend came up again, and this time they both smiled. It had begun as a shield. Now it felt like an invitation. The town watched their growing closeness with interest, but also acceptance. There were no rushed promises, no sudden declarations, just shared walks, shared meals, and shared respect. The woman felt something new taking shape, something built not on fantasy, but understanding. She learned his ways, his stories, his quiet humor. He learned her strength, her patience, her hopes, shaped by loss and resilience. When the chief finally prepared to leave, the goodbye felt heavier than expected. He told her that, wherever he went, He would remember this place, and the woman who reminded a town of its better self. She told him the door would remain open. He mounted his horse, then paused, turning back. He said that if she wished, he would return, not as a protector, but as a partner. The word hung between them, full of promise. She did not rush her answer. She smiled, nodding once, the same way she had on that first uncertain night. It was enough. Months later, when he returned, it was not with riders ready for conflict, but with time and intention. The town welcomed him, no longer as a stranger, but as someone known. The woman met him at the edge of town, her steps confident, her eyes clear. Their bond grew slowly, rooted in mutual respect and shared values. There was no church bell this time, no audience waiting for perfection, just two people choosing each other with open eyes. The past no longer defined her. It had shaped her, strengthened her, and then released her. The story of the abandoned bride became something else over time. It became the story of a woman who stood up, a town that learned to listen, and an Apache chief who believed that promises mattered. It became a reminder that courage was not loud, that justice could be firm without being cruel, and that happy endings were not given, but built. As the seasons turned, the land held their footsteps. The sky watched. The town carried forward a lesson it would not soon forget. Sometimes the words "I will be your boyfriend" meant more than romance. They meant I will stand with you, tell the truth, and help you write the rest of your story on your own terms.